One of my favorite approaches to history is examining it through the lens of a single commodity. This perspective provides a unique way to understand the broader world and how advancements over time have transformed the way we live. In this video, I'm exploring all of human history through the evolution of 4 beers. 4 beers that shaped civilization, drove its growth, and transformed rapidly as humanity advanced through new technologies and a deeper understanding of the course of history. Beer, a beverage that likely predates recorded history itself, has transformed dramatically over the millennia. What was once a rudimentary drink is now a refined drink shaped by over 4,000 years of human innovation. Its evolution mirrors our own, adapting with each leap in technology, culture, and science. What would beer have tasted at all these different points in history? Well, I'm gonna brew some and we'll find out. At the end of the video, we'll sit down and get a taste of 4,000 years of evolution of beer. But if you want to try this out for yourself, I've pre-assembled all the ingredients into a kit, ready for you to brew a gallon of each of these historic beers yourself, allowing you to experience this journey through history. Check it out in my store, howtomakehistory.store. I'm taking pre-orders now for 10% off. Beer today is defined by a few key characteristics. It's crafted from 4 primary ingredients: water, malted barley, hops, and yeast, and is almost always served cold and carbonated, offering a refreshing fizz with every sip. However, if we trace its origin, many of these defining traits were nowhere to be found. Let's delve into the story of beer's beginning and uncover how it transformed into the drink we know today. In our journey through the history of beer, we begin at its recorded origin, with the first known beer recipe dating back to 1800 BCE, ancient Mesopotamia. Our story starts with the foundational ingredient of beer, barley. Barley was one of the first grains domesticated in the Fertile Crescent around 11,000 years ago, making it central to human agriculture and brewing alike. As with all beers that follow, the process begins with the growing of barley. Followed by harvesting. The grains are then soaked in water and allowed to sprout, activating the enzymes that break down the starches into fermentable sugars. But then before the sprouts can consume these sugars, the process is halted by drying the grains. This process, called malting, is what's going to be our constant. This process will remain more or less the same for the rest of beer's history. The steps after malting, though, are what going to give rise to the incredible variety of beers we know today. But this first step starts everything. The other constant in beer production is yeast. Once the malted barley is broken down into sugars, yeast, a microorganism naturally present in the environment, ferments the sugars, producing ethanol and carbon dioxide as byproducts. Yeast is the true brewmaster, working unseen to transform barley into beer. However, humanity's understanding of the yeast's role in fermentation remained a mystery until much later in history. Despite this lack of knowledge, ancient brewers mastered fermentation through trial and error, learning to manipulate temperature and air exposure to encourage natural fermentation. But let's get to brewing. 5 years ago, I began my quest to trace the technological steps of humanity, starting from the Stone Age. One of my earliest videos focused on beer. Some theories suggest that the invention of beer was a key motivator for humanity's shift from nomadic hunter-gatherers to an agrarian civilization. While this theory is debated, the cultural and economic impact of beer on early society is undeniable. So for the history of beer, I return once again to visit this earliest known recipe of beer and give it a second attempt. The ancient beer is based on the Hymn of Nicaea, a Sumerian poem honoring the goddess of beer. According to the poem, the beer is brewed using bread made from malted barley. The bread is broken into pieces and added to the mash, with date syrup added for additional fermentable sugar. Like most beers of early history, no yeast is deliberately added. Instead, natural exposure induces the microorganisms needed for fermentation. Compared to modern beers, the ancient brew was strikingly different. Chunks of bread and grains remained in the mash, making the beverage thick and unfiltered. To separate the liquid from the solids, it was likely consumed using a reed straw. This style of beer remained common throughout Mesopotamia and its neighboring civilizations, including ancient Egypt, where similar brews were used as payment for laborers who built the pyramids. However, beer's popularity waned with the rise of the ancient Greeks and the Roman empires, which favored wine and dismissed beer as a drink for barbarians. But these so-called barbarians kept the tradition of beer alive and eventually evolved into the next beer I chose to explore. While the major powers in Europe for some time disdained beer for wine, the northern areas of Europe were less hospitable to grapes, and so they developed their own tradition of beer brewing. In this northern tradition, an important addition was made to beer that brought it closer to our modern understanding: the inclusion of a bittering, flavoring, and stabilizing agent. Early on, this role was filled by a mixture of herbs, collectively known as Groot.
I am Groot?
Groot could include a variety of ingredients, like mugwort, yarrow, bog myrtle, heather, marsh rosemary, and other local herbs. These herbs imparted unique flavors to the beer, with some also acting as mild preservatives, extending the beer's shelf life. Starting in the 11th century, a new plant started to be used called hops, offering very similar effects and even stronger preservative ability. But it wouldn't threaten the prominence of Groot in brewing for several centuries. In some areas, Groot was often taxed and controlled by the Catholic Church. So the rise of the Reformation and the Protestants in Germany coincides with the switch over to hops. As Martin Luther was beginning his revolt against the Catholic Church, the Reinheitsgebot, the German beer purity law was passed, defining beer as being only made from water, barley, and hops. Beers in this era could sometimes be divided into two categories: a strong beer, often drunk only on special occasion and festivals, and then the small beer, which is what most people drank most days. It was made with a lower proof. Brewing in this area was more small batch and drunk very shortly afterwards, often heating to temperatures based on touch and rough approximation. For my beer, I'm gonna try and make a small beer made with Groot, as I feel it was the more common drink and shares a lot of similarities with the previous ancient Sumerian beer. It was not too far removed from the literal liquid bread of our previous beer, although with less actual chunks of bread in it. Some versions of the small beer were thick with grains and close to a porridge. These beers were brewed to be low proof, somewhere between 0.5 to 2% alcohol.
I found it a little difficult to find too many sources for small beers, so I ended up combining a few for a unique result. I started with my fire-roasted malted grain and added some oats to some boiling water. After letting it seep, strained out the grains. Then I added my Groot mixture and let it seep for 20 minutes. Then I strained it into the fermenting vessel for a very short fermentation cycle for only a couple of days, and I'll be ready to drink.
They were generally consumed not so much as a modern beer would be, but more as an energy drink or even as a meal replacement, basically providing a bunch of extra calories during the day to get you through the workday. And it's believed that some laborers would consume up to 1.5 gallons a day. But because it was such a low proof that even with that large quantity, you'd basically be the equivalent of less than 3 regular drinks that you were spreading out throughout the day. So this wasn't really a beverage you were getting drunk off of. In fact, it was a drink that was shared with children. Small beers would remain popular in Europe for centuries, and the tradition even carried on to colonial America, where George Washington had his own recipe, and Ben Franklin is said to have even started his day with a small beer.
From the moment humans figured out that fermented fruit made the world seem a little funnier, we've had an unshakable love-hate relationship with alcohol. For all the good times it can bring, in the end, it's something our bodies want to purge. A reality that can hit hard the next morning. For millennia, these rough mornings after drinking have just been a part of the deal. But now there's an option designed to help you feel your best the next day. Today's sponsor, ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol Probiotic. It's the world's first genetically engineered probiotic, invented by PhD scientists to help break down unwanted byproducts of alcohol in the gut. That byproduct, not just dehydration, is a big reason you don't always feel great the day after drinking. ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol is designed to help you with that, so you can stay on track for what's ahead. Everyone's body is different, so results can vary. This product is based on solid science, but I can't say for sure how it'll work for you. What I can say is that when I tried it, I noticed a real difference. I went out for a few drinks with some friends. Sometimes the next day is just a slog and you can't even focus. But I tried some ZBiotic, and the next day I felt like I didn't even drink the night before. Of course, it's not a magic fix. Hydration, pacing yourself, and getting good sleep still matter. But a lot of people, including me, have found it helps. And the best way to know if it works for you, try it out. ZBiotics is backed by a 100% money back guarantee, so there's no risk in seeing how it fits into your pre-drinking routine. Go to zbiotics.com/make and use code MAKE at checkout for 15% off your first order. That's zbiotics.com/make.
Next, we transition from small scale to industrial scale. The adoption of hops and the longer shelf life they afforded beer are often credited as key factors in the transformation of beer from a cottage industry into a more commercialized and industrialized product. So let's step forward into the age of industrialization and science, where beer suddenly becomes a much more finely tuned science and brought to scale. The invention and adoption of new technologies like the thermometer and hydrometer brought brewing from an art informed by intuition to a finely tuned science. But also the wider spread of the use of coal in Britain and the knowledge of how to use it led to several new innovations in brewing beer. Using fire to halt the malting process has been practiced for most of brewing history, but drying malt over an open flame was difficult to control and often imparted a smoky flavor to the malt. This began to change in 1642 when coke, a refined and cleaner burning form of coal, was introduced into the malting process. Coke allowed a much more precise temperature control, enabling brewers to produce both lighter malts, critical for pale ales, which I'll discuss later, and consistently darker roasts, without any risk of smoky contamination. Darker roasted malts brought a new dimension to brewing. The high heat of roasting denatures some of the enzymes needed to convert starches into fermentable sugars, resulting in beers with a sweeter, fuller body, and in some cases, lower alcohol content. The roasting process also triggers the Maillard reaction, creating rich, complex flavors such as chocolate, coffee, and caramel that become hallmarks of many darker beer styles. The first reference to the porter comes in 1721, supposedly named because of its association with porters who moved shipping packages during the rise of the industrial age. It maintained the tradition of earlier beers of being a source of calories for workers, but also was known for having a stronger alcohol percent. Quickly rising in popularity, the porter was the first beer to become widely exported around the world in the 1700s. It's hard to say exactly when beer became carbonated because technically it kind of always has been. CO2 is a natural byproduct of fermentation, meaning all beer contains some level of natural carbonation. But up to the medieval eras of brewing, it would be basically considered flat. As brewing technologies and understanding improved and storage vessels like sealed barrels began to be used, levels of carbonation in your beer would get higher. But probably the most definitive point that allowed carbonation at the levels we see today was a mastery of glassblowing in England, which was more a byproduct of industrialization and the early deforestation of the 1600s. This is something I learned when I paid a visit to the Corning Museum of Glass in New York.
For most of glass history, wood is the primary fuel used to make glass. The early 1600s, age of European expansion, there starts to be an increased recognition about how much wood the glassmakers are burning through. And King James I of England literally is like, okay, glassmakers, stop using all the wood. I need that wood to make my ship. So you have to switch to using a different material to burn. So they started to move to coal. So English glassmakers started to use coal. Coal burns a lot hotter than wood does, which allows you to use less flux, melt your glass. So all these examples of early wine bottles that are sort of famous English glass production, they're made in coal furnaces, and you'll notice they're a lot darker, like it's really dark green, and much less flux, and because of that, it's a lot higher silica, and so it makes a stronger glass and a thicker glass that's a little bit stiffer, that then enables you to do things like make bottles that will travel over longer distances. You can make champagne and keep it in one of these bottles because it's strong enough to hold in the pressure from the carbonation inside the bottle.
This innovation not only paved the way for sparkling wine and champagne in 1662, but also allowed brewers to bottle beer with higher carbonation levels without any risk of explosion.
Now time to brew my version with these new technological breakthroughs. But first, I need some hops, which has been kind of a painful journey. Hops generally don't produce until the second year after planting. Back at our old studio, I built a planter box to grow some of our crops, including hops. The first year they really took off, but because it was off the ground, they ended up freezing and not returning the next year. Fortunately, I ended up buying some personal property after that and was able to start over and plant some more, only for them to be destroyed in the fire. So after a third attempt, I finally succeeded and got a very bountiful crop of hops to finally harvest. For my porter, I adopted an early porter recipe, supposedly from 1744, which used primarily brown roasted malt. I mashed the brown malt in at around 152 degrees for 1 hour. then strained and rinsed the grains with hot water. Next, added the hops and boiled for 90 minutes. Then let it cool, transferred to the fermenting jar, and pitched it with yeast.
It might just be coincidental, but what I find interesting is that the popularity of porters coincides with the arrival and popularity of coffee in England. The roasting techniques that were developed for coffee definitely contributed to some of the advancements in porter, such as the ability to achieve super dark roasts for making black malt. But I can't help but wonder if the similarities in their flavor notes contributed to porters becoming popular at the same time. And then they both ended up leaving at kind of roughly the same time period. British trade and tax policies started to make tea cheaper starting in the 1700s, leading to a decline in coffee's popularity in the early 19th century. A shift that paralleled porter's gradually loss of dominance.
After fermenting for a few weeks, I transferred them to glass bottles and added some additional yeast and sugar, just enough for the yeast to produce CO2 and carbonate the beer under pressure.
With these new technologies, a much more precise science behind roasting began. The introduction of instruments like the hydrometer in the 18th century allowed brewers to measure the efficiency of their mashing process and how much alcohol different roasts would yield. That seems to be a constant pressure in the evolution of beer. Taxes were a major pressure for finding the most efficient method of achieving the desired brew. With this tool, they found brown malt by itself was actually a fairly inefficient way to make a porter. Instead, a combination of 95% pale malt with 5% black malt would provide the same flavor as a brown malt, but yield a higher proof of alcohol per grain used. This advancement in both the ability to finely control the level of roasting of the malt and its potential alcohol yield fully opened the door for many of the wide variety of beers we enjoy today. After the prevalence of this porter, the later trend was towards paler ales, where the flavor notes were crisper and more refreshing. Which brew I should select for my final one ended up then being a bit of a challenge. I nearly went with the infamous India Pale Ale, but while it holds an important place in brewing history, its modern resurgence is largely a product of recent craft brewing trends rather than a reflection of historical dominance. Instead, the final choice needed to be the reigning king of today's most popular beers, the Pale Lager or Pilsner. This last beer combined two new trends of later beer making, the use of pale malts and a new understanding of yeast, including a new strain for fermentation, the lager yeast.
To see how big of a difference this new unique yeast strand made to a beer, I actually brewed two versions of a batch of beer and used ale yeast in one half and lager yeast in the other. Then we could compare what just the yeast did to change the taste of the beer.
That's interesting.
So this is the lager. Yeah, I think it has that crispness you get from a lager. And this is the ale. That's definitely different. It's more full-bodied. I think that's definitely an accurate description.
The difference is subtle, but I actually like this one better. Like, I'm definitely getting a little bit more with the ale, a little more full-bodied.
Good pale ale. Weirdly, now that I've had that one, this tastes has less flavor to it.
They're definitely similar. I can tell they're made from the same batch. Definitely different flavor notes coming from the yeast. It really feels more full-bodied. It's like flavor all over your tongue. This is like, I don't know, like almost citrusy, but not really citrusy. It just kind of has that crispness of like eating a lemon or an orange. It's very different, and I don't know which one I like better. I think they're both pretty good. I'd say if I had to choose, probably the ale, but they're very close together.
I've never really thought about how much the taste of a beer is a result of specific yeasts in brewing, so being able to taste the difference in an identical batch was very fascinating. So for a deeper dive on the topic, I wanted to explore the wide variety of modern yeasts and different ways it impacted taste. So I brewed up one identical batch of beer, but pitched it with 13 different yeasts. Then I challenged some local brewmasters to see how well they could taste the differences. Check out this deeper dive on my other channel, Everything Foodcraft, where I also explore how these different flavors are actually made in the brewing process. It really challenged my understanding of brewing, so I hope you check it out.
After the dominance and eventual ebb of popularity of porters, pale ale became the preferred dominant beverage, offering a lighter, more crisp flavor note devoid of much of the complexities the deeper roasted malts provided. Thanks to the better control of roasting through the use of coke, pale malt could be made devoid of previously common smoky and roasted flavors. But perhaps the last important ingredient for beer is also kind of its first. But this time with the full understanding of this period thanks to new inventions, the microscope, combined with advancements in science and microbiology. In 1857, Louis Pasteur was the first to recognize the true brewmaster, the most important ingredient of fermentation, fungi, yeast. Starting in the 14th century, a unique strain of yeast was developed in Bavaria, known for fermenting at the bottom of the vessels, and was developed in the centuries that followed. In 1870, it was named in the honor of Louis Pasteur as Saccharomyces pasteuronis. Before modern refrigeration, brewers relied on naturally cool caves to store beer during warmer months. While these conditions were initially used for darker beers like Dunkels and Bock, in 1842 they saw the breakthrough when pale malt and this lager yeast were combined to produce the first pale lager, Pilsner Urquell. The resulting beer was subtle, crisp, and balanced, with no single ingredient overpowering the flavor. Later technological advancements such as artificial refrigeration enabled year-round production and global distribution of pale lagers, while also popularizing the concept of beer being served cold. Today, nearly all the world's most popular beers are some variation of this light, refreshing style.
For my brew, I tried to replicate the original Pilsner recipe, which required a few extra steps called decoction mashing. This technique helps extract more character from the mash. To do this, after adding the pale malt to the mash, I separate a portion of it, heated that portion to a different temperature, then added it back to the main mash. The goal was to hit key temperature stages, like a protein rest and a saccharification rest, to better extract flavors and enzymes from the malt. Lastly, added my hops and boiled. Then strained into the fermenting vessels, added the lager yeast, and fermented. Lager yeast requires a lower temperature, so I left it to ferment in a mini fridge to around 55 degrees, and ultimately it almost ended up taking a full month to finish fermenting. With all 4 beers now fermented, let's give them a test and see what it tastes like to travel across 4,000 years of beer.
But if you want to try out this experiment yourself, check out the pre-made kits I've assembled to include all the recipes and instructions you need with every ingredient to brew your own 1-gallon batch of each of these historic recipes. And try it out yourself. Check it out on my store, howtomakehistory.store. Get 10% now if you pre-order. So here we have the basic evolution of beer over all of human history. We have the very beginnings with the Sumerian, earliest known recipe, very similar to what basically built the pyramids. And then we have the evolution through. We have through medieval. We have the small beer, which is a little bit lower proof, more commonly drinking for a little bit energy during the day. Then we get into industrialization. We have the porter, and then the more modern Pilsner. So you can see the evolution of this and give it a taste, see how well I did at brewing it. So we'll start at the beginning. We have the Sumerian. That is interesting. It's interesting. It's got a little bit of sourness, but also a bit of sweetness. Date syrup in there that I think gives it a little bit of sweetness. I think there's just some extra fermentation happening from the fact that there's full bread in there. Actually pretty good. I would not call this beer. I'd be very surprised if I ordered a beer and received this. Still tasty. I feel like I could build a pyramid now.
It tastes like a sour Cheez-It. I don't know where that's coming from. I don't know how to explain it, but there's an aftertaste of eating a Cheez-It that is also sour. And I'm very confused by that.
I don't know how to describe that actually. I don't think I would go with Cheez-Its actually. That's not what I'm tasting. It's almost reminiscent of like Switchel. If you ever had that kind of like old world, kind of like energy drink kind of thing. I think it's something that's made with like vinegar and molasses. Yeah, so that might be what I'm getting, is just like a really light note of like sour vinegariness, not like sour beer, but some type of really light sour undertone. It's not bad flavor though. Like it's kind of nice and refreshing. Like I've recently had like sour beers and I wouldn't even put it at that level of sourness, but there's like a hint of it. It's kind of nice.
Smell wise, it smells like beer, but it's a very like bread forward beer smell. Interesting. You get that kind of bread, that weedy taste. It's a very thin mouthfeel. It's not very thick. It's not bad. I've had worse beers, honestly. Like it's not a bad experience.
Small beer. This is gonna be a low proof, bittered with Groot. It is very full-bodied. I'm actually surprised how dark it turned out because I didn't really roast the grain too darkly, just a little bit to dry it out. So I'm surprised it turned that dark.
very full-bodied. I feel like the grain, you definitely taste it. It feels very caloric. Taste just a hint of the alcohol, I think. There's definitely some bitter notes, which I think comes from the Groot. Overall, that's actually pretty good. I could see starting my day with a small beer.
Tastes like watered down beer, very watered down. Although the aftertaste does come at you like normal beer.
Very interesting color. It's a very different flavor. It's approaching the flavor like hints of beer, I guess. I don't know how to describe that. It's not as bready as I was expecting it to taste. It almost tastes roasted in some way.
I'm curious about this one because it's so dark and it's so murky. I'm curious what the difference is gonna be. As it was going in, I could smell that coffee taste, which I don't love coffee, but it has that coffee kind of muddy. It's like you took a really mild beer and ran it through a coffee filter that's been used. Not my favorite. It's a mild taste, but not a great taste. It's very watery. It doesn't taste amazing.
So we have the porter, which is starting to use more heavily roasted grains and also includes the addition of hops. And probably the most noticeable difference will be carbonation. It's pretty good. It is that carbonation that just makes it beer. It's hard to imagine that most of history beer was not carbonated. It's got a lot of flavor. You definitely taste the roasted notes of it. Very comparable to coffee. I would definitely recognize this as a porter. I feel like I could order this somewhere. Not the best porter I've tried, but it's definitely a porter.
It looks good. That's the good stuff. I like that. I like that. A lot more carbonation that comes through in the flavor.
It's not as chocolatey as like I would have expected. More like an Irish red beer. It's kind of similar to that. Yeah, not bad though.
This one, I'm kind of excited to try this one because this one was the only one that had a head. And so it looked like a nice porter beer. And so I'm excited to try this one. Kind of similar there, a little bit of notes of coffee. Oof, ugh. Disappointing. I was hoping for a lot of rich flavor, but it is kind of that coffee taste as well. Coffee water, unfortunately. I don't love that one.
And lastly, we have the lager with grain roasted over coke to try and prevent any smoky roasting flavor, whereas the porter tried very hard to be roasted. The Pilsner tries to remove that flavor note, trying to focus on a different type of flavor. So it's removing a lot of flavor notes, and then the lager is going to change the taste of the yeast, make it a bit more crisper, less full-bodied. So the taste is probably most comparable to your average beer you're gonna get somewhere. It's very crisp, very refreshing, definitely a light beer that I feel like very comparable to something you get from a bar.
Actual Pilsner. This one is, I guess you could call it smoother.
It's definitely a Pilsner, but like sweet grassy flavoring. I think I'm noticing the alcohol most on this last one.
It smells like beer, more like a modern beer. Okay, I think this is gonna taste like a Miller Lite. And it does. It tastes like a mild Miller Lite. It tastes like it's kind of that watered down Miller Lite feel and taste.
So this kind of really demonstrates the history of beer, kind of the different forms it's gone through and the way technology has helped shape it. And the last two ones are definitely the most like beer now. I think carbonation is definitely a huge thing, but also just kind of focusing in on the flavor notes you usually get in beer, which includes hops, certain level of proof, either kind of leaning in or away from the malty roasted grain, or trying to focus on something a little bit more crisp. So these are not something you would normally consider beer, I don't think, but for most of history, this is what beer was, and this is what most people through history have probably drinking as beer.
The last two are interesting. The two more modern compared to the other two. They're comparable but different. These two, they taste like how I think beer is supposed to taste. Out of all of them, I do think I like this one the best.
If you were to give me this blind, this is the one I'd be like, well, that's a beer. But it's still unique in its own way. And then I'd put this one second, of course. These two, especially this one, I'm not even sure what I would recognize as a beer. The flavors aren't off-putting, I guess you can say. Somebody hand me that, I'd be like, that must be some tonic. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Like some kind of like cold tea remedy kind of things. Like I hate to say it, but like carbonation kind of does make a beer. Not that I wouldn't drink one that's flat, I guess you could say, but like it definitely adds like a whole nother level. Well, if I put them in order, I'd say carbonation, a little more alcohol content, and then like bittering I'd put in like a distant third. So I know it's like bittering is pretty necessary to aid in preservation. I don't think flavor-wise it's absolutely necessary for me.
I think of these, I actually prefer the first one. because it's a unique experience. You really kind of taste the bread in it. It doesn't have the carbonation, so it almost feels more like a juice, which is weird to say. But the flavors in it are just unique, and I kind of think that they're kind of cool. So I like this one the best.
I started this project because I finally had a successful hops harvest and couldn't decide which beer to finally cover next. So I compromised and decided to cover all beer in human history. Needless to say, this ended up being a huge undertaking and it's taking a lot longer to complete than I anticipated. I likely got some facts wrong or missed some important details. It's inevitable in a scope of a project this large. Let me know in the comments if there's anything major. Personally, while I'm an avid beer drinker, this really made me better understand beer and all the complexities in it a lot better. It's fascinating the intricate evolution beer has through history. First helping to fuel the rise of civilizations and some of the largest buildings like the pyramids, and then evolving in new directions through events in history. Beer kind of has hops because of Lutherans, and it's carbonated because of colonialism and deforestation. Some of the first adopters of refrigeration were brewers looking to brew lagers, helping to spread the technology and the unique concept of ice-cold beer. All of these integral aspects to our modern understanding of beer, but only recent developments. This project is a little different from what I normally do, but wanted to explore the style of this format and perhaps spend more time exploring the context and history of some of our commodities rather than just always struggling to recreate it from the bottom up. It'll be interesting to see everyone's reaction to this and if I should do more of these. With as much as I learned about beer in this project, it surprisingly opened the door to learning even more in another video I'm releasing on my new channel, Everything Foodcraft. This channel has a broader scope and allows me to explore some things a little deeper. In it, I took a deeper dive into beer yeast, something that really didn't evolve until much later in beer history, and learned a lot more about the more complex aspects of yeast fermentation, somehow expanding my mind even further on this topic. So be sure to check that out. I haven't done too much with this channel yet, but I'm in the process of rolling out a few limited run series where I explore things a little deeper outside of the normal HTML context. So please subscribe to check that out. Lastly, thanks again to all my supporters on Patreon. Thanks for watching.
If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe and check out other content we have covering a wide variety of topics. Also, if you've enjoyed these series, consider supporting us on Patreon. We are largely a fan-funded channel and depend on the support of our viewers in order to keep our series going. Thanks for watching.